You're listening to PumaPodcast.
During the 2023 oil spill, we didn't realize how grave the damage would be. We really underestimated how the tragedy would unfold. The amount of damages was just way higher than what we would have expected and what even the government estimated. This amount barely even took into account the long term damage.
Hi, I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka. In this episode, we talk about the recent oil spills off the coast of Bataan and how we can prevent these incidents from further damaging our environment and Filipinos' livelihood. In the last 2 weeks, 2 ships have sunk off the coast of Bataan, while another ran aground. The first is the MTKR Terra Nova. It was heading for Iloilo on July 25 when it capsized off the waters of Limay, Bataan. The Terra Nova's 1.4 million metric ton oil shipment began leaking out of the sunken ship. The Philippine Coast Guard warned that this could result in the largest oil spill in Philippine history. One capsized tanker with a massive oil shipment is already enough to cause alarm. But just 2 days after, another tanker, the MTKR Jason Bradley, capsized off the coast of Mariveles, Bataan.
Nadagdagan pa ang mga barkong binabantayan ngayon sa Bataan dahil sa banta ng oil spill. Ito ay ang inabandonang barko na MV Mirola 1 na sumadsad at bahagyang lumubog. At sarap ng mga problema na yan.
The Philippine Coast Guard is currently working around the clock to contain the seeping oil from these 3 ships. So far, it's capped all the crucial pipes of the MT Terra Nova, and it's set to begin siphoning the leaked oil in a few weeks' time. The PCG is also siphoning oil leaking out of the MV Mirola 1, and they're set to begin operations with oil from the Jason Bradley soon. But the process of siphoning oil from one ship could take up to 2 weeks.
Sa ngayon, pinaghahandaan na ng Coast Guard ang siphoning o ang paghigop sa industrial fuel oil na karga ng MT Terra Nova. Tatagal naman ng 1 linggo ang pag-fabricate at paglalagay ng metal sealing cap upang maalis ng langis sa motor tanker. Nakatakdang magbigay ng technical assistance ang isang team mula
As
sa US
authorities
Coast
work
Guard
around the clock
na may
on cleanup
karanasan sa
operations, the PCG confirmed that the oil spill has already reached the provinces of Bulacan and Cavite. The massive oil spill has caused Limay, Bataan, and Cavite province to ban fishing in their waters. This will affect the livelihood of around 39,000 fisher folk. This is a familiar sight for the environmental advocacy think tank, the Center for Energy, Ecology, and Development, or SEED. Just last year, a fishing ban was in place in Oriental Mindoro after an oil tanker, the MT Princess Empress, sank off its waters. The 5-month fishing ban in Oriental Mindoro's coastal towns caused socio-economic losses of up to 1.1 billion pesos. And to this day, fisherfolk in Oriental Mindoro still struggle to catch the same amount of fish that they used to before the oil spill.
Nagbaba ang aming mayor dito sa Pola ng isang direktiba na nagbabawal na pangisda na mahabang panahon na halos sinabot po kami ng 4 months na hindi nakakapalaot na talagang walang tigil na talagang nasa tabi lang kami. Napakahirap po, kala namin isang simpleng paglubog lang po ng barkong iyon. Subalit, napakahirap po ang epekto sa mamayan at lalo na po sa mga coastal barangay na nasakupan ng aming bayan. Hindi lang po sa aming bayan, lahat po ng coastal municipality po ng Oriental Mindoro apektado talagang nahirapan po sa loob ng tinagal ng ilang buwan po.
Aldrin Villanueva, president ng koalisyon ng mga mangingisda apektado ng oil spill. He was speaking at SEED's webinar on the impact of massive oil spills on all sectors of society.
At tulad din po ng nangyari ngayon sa parte ng Bataan at ng Manila Bay po, isa pong malaki naman pong mahirap sa mga tulad naming maliliit na mangingisda. Ang dinanas namin dito ay parang daig pa ang COVID. Walang halos katulad din dahil sa hindi kami makapalaot dahil lang tao dito sa amin halos 60-70%.
Since they were unable to fish, Kuya Aldrin says some of his colleagues moved on to other jobs to bring food to the table.
Paghahanap buhay dahil sa loob ng 4 na buwan na straight na walang halos inabot pa halos sa taon na mahina ang panguhuli. Ngayon lang nakaka-recover. Ito nga ang epekto, tumigil ang iba, yung ibang mga mangisda ay pumunta sa ibang lugar nung panahon may oil spill sa amin sa dahil lang nag-construct muna sila at carpintero kung saan may merong trabaho na silang magagawa para sa pamilya nila.
An oil spill doesn't just take away one's livelihood either. According to attorney Joanna Ala, Seed's lawyer for Oceans and Climate, the oil spill's impact on locals' health remains unknown.
I think it was June or July that fishing bans were being lifted from Mindoro, but there was no assurance as to the safety, as to whether you could consume the fish which was being caught from the area. Of course, there are still remnants of oil in the water. Of course, there are still oil in the mangroves. So whether or not it was safe to consume the fish caught from the area was not taken into account. It was the lifting of the fishing ban was a balance between economic interests and scientific studies. So scientific studies should have prevailed. However, the call for fisherfolk to start fishing again and the need for them to have economic income was also a very high priority. But then again, the long-term health impacts of the oil spill are still unknown.
Authorities believe that Bataan's oil spills will not cause the same kind of damage seen in Oriental Mindoro, since the sunken tankers are in shallower waters, and it will be easier to siphon off the oil. But what can the Philippines do to actually prevent these incidents from happening in the first place? More on this after a quick break. Attorney Joanne Ala, Seed's lawyer for Oceans and Climate, says there are a myriad of laws that aim to prevent water pollution and hold responsible entities accountable. This includes the Clean Water Act, the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act, and the Oil Pollution Compensation Act. But she believes the oil spill in Oriental Mindoro and the ongoing incidents in Bataan have shown where our laws fall short.
So, yung mga laws na to, they provide for penalties causing pollution, including oil. However, yung inadequacy here is, although maraming laws, maraming provisions which provide para sa compensation ng mga damages caused, yung kulang yung sa prevention. Yung mga laws na to come in only after nangyari na yung disaster. Pero sa pag-prevent, kulang pa. Also, liability ng charter. So, ano yung charter? The charter refers to someone who rents the ship. So, inaarkila nila yung barko to transport goods. So, in this case, oil. Tapos sa both oil spills which occurred, it was SL Harbor Bulk Terminal Corporation. So, yung SL Harbor Bulk Terminal Corporation, subsidiary po ito ng San Miguel Corporation. Sila ang in charge for both both shipments of oil in Mindoro and in Manila Bay. So as you can see, as the charterer, under the laws which we have, hindi sila magiging liable. Free sila from any liability. Free sila from paying any damages.
Attorney Joanne also believes the Philippines can still strengthen its laws to prevent pollution such as oil spills. If oil spills are prevented from happening in the first place, we wouldn't need to worry about compensation. And she believes Filipinos, especially those living in coastal communities, are the best champions for these reforms. Attorney Joanne says we only need to look at Oriental Mindoro's local communities for an example.
And it was through the local communities that came together that we were able to strengthen the voice of the citizens. So by organizing themselves, they were able to amplify their calls to the government. And by organizing, we were also able to have concrete stories of the impact of the oil spill. Most of the affected communities were the champions in calling for the protection for marine and coastal biodiversity and livelihood. And that is what we are pursuing now.
Authorities are racing round the clock to contain the oil spills in Bataan. The process can take up to 2 weeks per ship. But even after cleanup operations are done, the oil spill's effects could still linger for generations. Because of this, environmentalists and coastal communities urge Philippine politicians to work towards strengthening our anti-pollution laws. This prevents similar incidents from happening again. After all, in an environmental disaster like an oil spill, hindi lang ang likas ng yaman ng Pilipinas ang maapektuhan. The health and livelihood of Filipinos are also on the line.
Kailangan mabilis na aksyon ng gobyerno natin na mapigilan yung pagkalat ng langis. Dahil pag ito ay kumalat ng tuloy-tuloy na naman, na hindi napigilan yung mga unang lumabasan, malaking epekto sa kalikasan at sa mga tatamaan ito yung maliliit na mga isda na naman. Kaya kailangan nananawagan kami at sana wag na mangyari pang ulit. Kaya nangyari naman dyan sa Bataan na yung nangyari dito sa amin wag mangyari sa Bataan na matagal bago buwan, bago nasaraan o nasait ang langis doon sa naturang barko sa ilalim ng tubig.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was written by Tatiana Maligro. The oil spills in Bataan are massive, and they're affecting tens of thousands of fisherfolk and residents in coastal communities. So we hope that this episode helped you better understand the long-term effects of these disasters and inspired you to lobby for stronger prevention laws. It would also be great if you shared this episode with someone who's worried about the implications of the oil spill. This episode was edited by Pidoy Blanco. Our Teka Teka executive producer is Jill Caro, and our editor-in-chief is Carl Javier. If you like this episode, share it with a friend or two. And of course, don't forget to follow Teka Teka and Puma Podcast on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. Thanks for listening.